Hello everyone and welcome to this edition of Law Matters. I'm Ann Baldwin of Baldwin Media. On this program we're talking about something that many of us have, homeowners insurance coverage. But is it enough, and what are you up against when you make a claim? Here today we have two individuals with a lot of experience on this subject. Attorney Mike Conroy, who's a partner of the law firm of Hassett and George with offices in Simsbury and in Cromwell. And one of his areas of expertise is insurance coverage disputes on behalf of both carriers and policyholders. And also Ron Cox, who has worked as a property claim representative for a major insurance company and as a field property adjuster. And now he's the owner of Loss Settlement Services, a public adjusting firm who assists policyholders in the property claims process. So we have an adjuster and an attorney on a program talking about homeowners coverage and claims. Some would say, gentlemen, that that's an interesting combination, but as we read in the news, a necessary one. So why are you two here together on Law Matters today to talk about this, Mike?
Well, thanks for having us, Ann. Anytime you enter into the claims process as a layperson, we all need insurance coverage. Unfortunately, not all of us have the proper coverage, and we'll talk about that. But anytime you have someone who's unfamiliar with the process entering into it, sometimes the stakes can get pretty high. And what you find is frequently you have individuals like Ron involved in the various types of claims. Sometimes, if there's a dispute or just concerns about whether or not the process is going properly, you might need to involve an attorney as well.
And Ron, so you've worked on the other side. You worked for the big companies. You worked for the conglomerates, if you will.
Yes, I have.
And now you're working more for the consumer?
That's correct. I spent the major part of my career working on that side of the fence. And many years ago, you were sort of, quote unquote, allowed to be an adjuster, whereby you were trusted into go examining damage and paying a fair figure. But as the industry has seemed to change and they're looking to exclude coverage as opposed to include coverage, I jumped the fence and became an advocate for the policyholder so that they can have their own adjuster go up against the insurance company's adjuster and be on an equal playing ground.
So why do people have to do that? I think, as a homeowner and a consumer, I have insurance coverage, and if I have a valid claim, I don't, foresee any legal issues or any kind of a hassle. But the reality is, right, with the majority of claims, there are disputes that you have to fight on behalf of the consumer.
Well, I don't know that it's a majority in, but unfortunately, it's a not uncommon occurrence that you have a large disparity between what the insured believes they're entitled to, or in some cases truly is entitled to, and that which the insurance company is willing to pay. To an extent, there are degrees in any property claim, and Ron can speak to that. If you get 5 different estimates for the same damage, quite often you're going to find 5 different numbers. There's no set in stone exact amount that can cover any particular loss, but unfortunately what we see from time to time is a carrier that will take a coverage position that isn't entirely consistent with the policy terms, or we'll see estimates brought in by either company employees or vendors that they have relationships with that are very favorable to the carrier and unfavorable to the policyholder. And if you have a policyholder that doesn't know any better, quite frankly, the assumption is and the expectation is that, yes, this is my insurance company, they're looking out for me. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. I think more often than not, it turns out to be the case, but every once in a while there's a bad apple. And that's when
and that's how you created your business.
Well, exactly right. There's a lot of available literature out there about what turned in the industry in terms of them going from folks that look to include coverage and then now exclude coverage. Basically, it was found out through, I believe the report was called the McKinsey report, that it was better for them to delay, deny, and defend claims, and they would make more money based on their premiums as opposed to actually going out and paying a fair number. Now, it's funny, Mike said the word exact. Most insurance companies use a estimating program for your damage called Xactimate. And that is basically written and tied into ISO. ISO is the major corporation that writes most insurance policies. So the insurance industry is basically writing their own estimates and their own amounts of damage for themselves and not looking out for the policyholder. And unfortunately, the stats are that maybe once in every 30 years, you're going to have a claim. So that one time, you need to be, quote unquote, an expert. And my analogy is, if you get into a severe accident, do you hire an attorney? Usually you do. Well, if you have a catastrophic loss at your home, you should hire someone that can play on an equal playing ground with them and know all the nuances of the policy and estimating, et cetera, to ensure they get indemnified properly.
And let's back up a little bit. Let's talk about, because people watching this segment of Law Matters want to know, so what kind of insurance coverage should we have? You get a mortgage, you buy a home, you know, what is it? What should be your foundation? What should you be looking at as far as coverage goes? And I know that there's been some new coverages added that most of us, you know, you get settled into your home or your condo or you're a renter and you don't think about these additional coverages that you should have. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Certainly. You own your home. Sometimes a major mistake people will make on insurance coverage is they tend to insure or try to insure their home for what the mortgage says. That's not what you should be concerned with. You should be concerned with, if your home, you know, God forbid, were leveled tomorrow, what could you rebuild it for? And that's the major key. If your home is a square foot and it's of a certain quality and all encompassing, you need to make sure that you are insured properly.
The replacement value.
The replacement value, absolutely, absolutely correct. And now some of the nuances that you spoke of are, like, for instance, if you have replacement costs, there's also an endorsement called guaranteed replacement costs, meaning they will rebuild your house to a certain percentage above what you insure it for, but if you make any additions or alterations to your home along the way and do not tell them, them being the insurance company, that could void the endorsement and you won't get that coverage. These are little nuances the consumer needs to be aware of.
And that's an excellent point that Ron brings up. A lot of people, they'll make a change to the house or they'll very common scenarios, you see someone finish a basement.
Absolutely.
And they don't pull a permit, they don't tell the town because they don't want their taxes to increase. Well, guess what? If you don't disclose that, it causes a whole host of problems down the road, not the least of which, if you don't disclose that to your insurance company, something happens to the home,
correct.
It's not covered. There are
The whole home isn't covered?
Well, I'll get to that.
Okay.
There are some other issues that people ask me about, and I say, when in doubt, disclose. Always disclose. Well, I just bought my kids a trampoline. Do I need to tell my insurance company? Absolutely you do. That's classified as an unusual risk. There are a lot of injuries that result from trampoline use. I just bought a dog. Do I need to tell my insurance company? Absolutely
That you
do.
bought a dog?
Yeah, absolutely. Certain dogs are classified as exceptional risks. And if the insurance company places coverage without knowledge of some of these risks, if you ever have a loss that's related to one of those risks, not only can they deny the claim, in some instances, they can void the policy from its inception. In other words, you might, hypothetically, let's say you buy a new house and you get the insurance coverage that the lender requires, but you don't bother telling them about Pookie, your pet Rottweiler. Well, you're in the house for 6 months, and Pookie takes issue with one of your guests, and there's an injury, and there's a claim against your liability coverage, which is part of your homeowner's package. The insurance company, in that scenario, they could void the policy from its inception and refund your premium. So you're facing a $100,000 lawsuit, which will cost tens of thousands of dollars in attorney's fees to defend, which should have been covered under your homeowner's liability policy had you disclosed that aspect of the risk. For your trouble, you might receive a voided policy and a refund check for that $1,000 in premium you paid, and then you're on your own.
Wow.
That's right.
That's incredible. So you see this happen to people.
Yes, unfortunately, the times they start inquiring about their policy is when they actually have a claim. That's not the time to start doing it. You start, if you have any question, as an example, my mom and dad, I went over to their home in Berlin, Connecticut, and they own a home that's roughly 2,000 square feet with an attached breezeway and attached two-car garage. And I looked at mom's policy, and she said, well, it's insured for $90,000. But I have guaranteed replacement costs. Yeah, you do up to 25% of the 90. So if this all burnt to the ground, then they'd come out and write you a check for $113 and say goodbye. So what I did is, look, Mom, you got to reevaluate this. Then they did, and now it's like right around $300,000, which is much more appropriate. So again, there's folks out there that may be floating around spending their hard-earned money on their policy premiums. Just make sure it's accurate. Make sure that it's going to cover you. And if you have any questions, call somebody. Call your agent. Call even Mike or myself. We handle those phone calls all the time. Hey, listen, I have a question about a claim. Is it a claim? Is it not a claim? Do I have enough coverage? Do I not? That type of thing. So,
I think that's one of the things too, that you buy this coverage, you put it in your safe deposit box, and you forget
Correct.
about it.
Right.
And a lot of us have owned our homes for a long time, so
That's
it's
exactly
something
right.
that you have to revisit and go back and look at.
True.
Talk a little bit about law and ordinance coverage. That's a fairly new concept, is it not?
It's not necessarily a new concept, but it's a coverage that isn't necessarily standard. It's an
Right.
endorsement type of coverage. And Ron, in his line of work, runs across that all the time with the
correct.
rebuilding of properties, especially in an area like this where you have older neighborhoods that are well established, houses that were built, entire neighborhoods that were built several code changes ago.
Correct.
And as Ron mentioned earlier,
That's true.
statistically, the average person might have one claim every 30 years.
That's about right.
Well, that same statistic applies to your average home.
So what is it? Define what law and ordinance coverage is first.
Okay. Basically, law and ordinance coverage is, say you have a home that was built 25, 30 years ago. The codes at that time were such in that there's, electrical was supposed to be this, framing was supposed to be that, you name it, heating and venting, air conditioning, etc. So now you have a loss 25, 30 years later. But the codes have changed, and in order to enforce, in other words, for you to get a certificate of occupancy for your home, you have to now update these codes, and that may be a difference in cost. Under a standard homeowner's policy, those are not covered, but they can be endorsed onto it if you buy extra premium to do that, so that if you own an older home, you won't be socked with a big, say, code difference bill from your contractor. So it will all be encompassed within the loss.
Because what we see is, again, with these older homes, and maybe you have a house that was built in the 60s, and everything's been fine. It's never been hit by lightning, there's never been a fire, there's never been a substantial loss to that property. Well, as we see with the weather past couple of years,
Yes.
all the storms, the hurricanes, we're seeing a lot of people having their first foray,
coming down.
their first foray into the homeowners claim arena. And what you see quite often is with some of these aspects of home building that have changed over the years, the housing codes have evolved as well.
That's right.
Well, the local zoning folks and the enforcement folks, they don't care whether or not you have coverage that's going to fully reimburse you for the cost to bring it up to code. All they care is, you want a certificate of occupancy? That has to meet code. And as Ron mentioned, sometimes replacing what was lost or rebuilding it as it was is going to cost a certain amount. But bringing it up to the new code, that's a completely different ballgame. And unless you have the proper coverage for that, the difference in price, regardless of whether or not you have replacement cost coverage,
Right.
that could be a substantial amount. And you may think you bought the Cadillac of coverage, and you end up with a rust bucket,
Right.
depending on the situation.
So let's talk a little bit about how homeowners can kind of protect themselves, if you will. I've always heard if you want to win a court case, have the best paper trail. Keep the best records. So what should homeowners do? Should they be taking video and photos of their property and of things so that they have that? Or let's say they suffer damage. Should they document that? Because I know in my situation, sometimes it takes a long time for an adjuster to come out and take a look at things, especially if a lot of other people in your area are impacted.
That's true.
Well, by the time a file hits my desk, it's usually because there's been a problem. Best case scenario is when something is as documented as possible. The more you document your claims, your interactions with your insurance companies, the more you document what you have in your home, the easier it'll be for us to do our job and do it well for you. I tell people, just in case, you never know when you're going to have a serious homeowner's claim. I tell them to make sure anytime there's a substantial change, anytime you redo a room, you buy new furniture, anything of that nature, go around with your video camera. Take 5 minutes, go through the house, just take a video. Store, if it's on a physical medium, store it off-site.
In the cloud.
Upload it up to the cloud, just so it's there, just so you have it. Because that way, if, again, God forbid you have a fire and the house is leveled, you don't have any documentation of what was in that house unless you can show. And who keeps receipts for everything they ever buy? It doesn't happen. But that way, if you can show your insurance company that you actually had what you've listed as the items lost.
Exactly right.
And jewelry especially too.
Oh, jewelry.
And having writers when it comes to jewelry.
And that's another good point, Ann. A lot of people, a lot of these issues boil down to two things. Number one, consumers, your average consumer is not well versed in the adequacy of coverage, and they trust their agent. And the second item is that unfortunately most people price shop, and they put the price point as the number one concern, and they just assume, well, insurance is insurance and my agent will make sure I'm totally covered, and most of them do, but every once in a while you end up with the cheapest policy if you're price shopping. Well, the cheapest policy isn't necessarily the best policy.
Very true.
So you see that a lot too in your experience?
A lot in my experience, absolutely. There's certain carriers that we are continuously interacting with, and there's other carriers we rarely interact with. And a large part of that is because there's those that are, like Mike said, the Cadillac of insurance companies, and they ensure that their folks are, adequately covered and their adjusters are reasonable and fair. But then there's another section of the industry that's not the same. Mike is exactly right. Folks shop for the cheapest price, and unfortunately, the cheapest price follows the least amount of coverage. And the most difficult people to actually get your claim paid as well.
Well, as a former reporter, I got to put you on the spot. Can you name a couple of the ones that you would recommend? I'm not asking you to call out the bad ones, but who are the Cadillacs?
Well, right away, Chubb Insurance, in my opinion, is marvelous. The only reason I've ever handled Chubb claims is because the Chubb customer was too busy to actually handle their own claim. They have families and whatnot. And I basically met and settled adjustments with those folks very easily. Amica is another company. It seems to be very, very easy for me, anyway, based on my experience with numerous claims against them. But again, there's not a lot. There's not a lot, but those are two that I could think of off the top of my head that so far in my experience have been very reasonable to deal with. So.
But I wanted to get back to one point you raised on the jewelry. A lot of people just assume they buy their insurance, especially if they have guaranteed replacement costs. Well, just the term makes you assume guaranteed replacement cost. If I have a loss, they guarantee to replace whatever I have. Not so fast. Certain items, unusual value items, in many cases jewelry, you need a special rider. You need to pay additional premium. You need to get those items scheduled on your policy. Or there's a coverage limit. For example, most companies have a $2,000 coverage limit for unscheduled jewelry. Now, I don't know how often you have your jewelry appraised.
Don't ever buy me a $2,000 piece of jewelry.
It's quite, many pieces have value in excess of that.
Absolutely.
And if you've got your grandmother's engagement ring, something along those lines.
Priceless,
you could have some serious value that will be completely lost if it's not properly scheduled. And
well, I know recently I added a piece of jewelry to they added it to my home, or to my auto insurance, because I have my homeowners and my auto with the same company.
Oh, okay.
So they added the rider right to my auto insurance. But, and for me, it's peace of mind, knowing that if something were to happen, that at least it's coverage. And it was only about, it was a pretty good sized piece of jewelry, but $200 additionally a year, it's worth that peace of mind for me. So like you said, I think you both said this, don't be cheap, don't be unreasonable about it. And unfortunately, unexpected things happen beyond your control that you can't control. So let's talk a little bit about the claims process. What do you recommend, Ron, that if somebody suffers a loss, what's the first thing that they should do?
Well, first of all, Mike sort of touched on it. Certainly document your claim.
That's in advance of.
Yeah, right. Recently
after.
we've had winds and tornadoes, so just using the most common one right now would be a tree on a home. Obviously, you take photos, you're absolutely, distraught over it. So, a couple of photos, even on your phone, it could be worth $1 million. It really could be. Obviously, you call your insurance company, you report it, you take whatever steps are necessary to prevent further damage, to mitigate. If that means calling out a tree service or getting the roof
You
tarped.
can do that.
Yes, you should.
Okay.
But the caveat is you can do it, just keep records of it.
Okay.
Make sure that, who is out there writing you a bill, writing you an estimate, et cetera. That's the best thing you can do. Let your adjuster come. Typically, we get involved after the adjuster comes out and writes their estimate, and folks try to get the repairs done for what they wrote, and they say, well, we can't do it for that, and the adjuster says, well, that's all we're going to pay you. Then you typically will call an advocate like us to help them. But up front, emergency repairs, mitigate your damages, photo it up if best as possible, call your insurance company, put them on notice immediately, and then wait for the gears of insurance to begin.
And also, Ann, every step of the process, to the extent possible, has to be in writing.
Yes.
You want everything in writing, even if it's just an email. Even if it's just
All
an
right.
email. You want notice of everything to your insurance company in writing. Could just be email exchanges with the adjuster. When you're in the very early phases, if you've got an emergency situation, Ron used the example of a tree on a house. Obviously, you need to get that taken care of
Right.
as soon as possible. And you, as the insured, have the obligation to mitigate your damages, as well as the right to do what you have to do. But you want to make sure that the insurance company is at least on notice of what you're doing. And a lot of these contractors, they're coming out, the expectation is in this situation they're going to be paid by the insurance company, and they understand that. But you, as the homeowner, are the one that's actually retaining them. So you have to be careful about what you're agreeing to with the vendor, with the contractor, because some of these contracts
Very true.
are a little tricky. And what you want to do is you want to the extent possible, have the insurance company involved in that process. And you want to try and set it up so that the contractor is communicating with the insurance company about being paid. Because what we've seen, unfortunately, in far too many cases, is I think Ron touched on this, the contractor finishes whatever their service is, hands you a bill for $10,000, you hand that to the insurance company, and they say, well, that's great, but we're only paying $5,000.
Right.
Yeah.
Now what?
Now
what?
you're
Now
saddled with
what?
the rest.
Exactly.
You talk about corresponding with your insurance company in emails. I recently had a situation with an insurance company, I'm actually involved in it now, where they won't email. They refuse to communicate via email.
There's a reason for that.
And what is that reason? So you say so what I'm doing is I'm just journaling everything, writing it down the old-fashioned way because they refuse to email.
Mike can answer that.
Well, they don't want a paper trail,
Right.
but you have to insist on it. You really do.
You can insist on an email communication.
As the insured, you're in the driver's seat. And we can talk about this a little more off air. I'd be very interested to hear the details. But what is the preferred method of communication?
Right.
Right.
Are you communicating by fax?
Fax. Yeah, if you still have a fax machine.
Well, I can back Ann up. There is a certain insurance company that refused to communicate with us via email as well. So we basically were on a paper trail with letters, and it cost some money, but we made sure we charged them as well. Certified letters, you got to sign for it, so it means they got it.
And the problem with email from the perspective of some is that it's too quick and too easy and too informal. And I think that may be part of the motivation behind that policy. But one other thing I thought we should touch on is a recurring problem that I see, and I'm sure Ron sees it as well. We've been talking about homeowners. Renters.
Yes.
There are a lot of people out there that are renting homes, renting apartments, renting condominiums, and they seem to assume, oh, I don't need coverage. I don't own this place. Wrong. A homeowner's policy, and there are renters' homeowners policies.
Right.
If you're a renter, it's a different type of coverage. It doesn't provide coverage for the structure itself, but it provides all the other standard homeowners coverages. It's going to cover all of your personal possessions. It's going to cover your personal liability.
Yes.
It's going to cover to an extent, generally medical payments for others while on your premises.
property.
So if someone gets injured, there's at least some money available in the policy to pay for their medical expenses. And another key issue that we see all too frequently is additional living expenses.
Absolutely.
In any homeowner's policy, there's a provision for additional living expenses. If for some reason there's a loss to the property and the property is uninhabitable for a period of time, the policy provides coverage to pay those expenses.
Correct.
Pay your hotel
So you got to go stay in a
bill.
hotel or?
Right. And what we see far too often, and you see, young kids fresh out of college working their first job or what have you, there's some sort of loss to where they're staying. Sometimes if it's a multi-family house, and
Right.
they sustain the typical damage in a storm, or sometimes we see apartment fires, things
Right.
like that. If you're out of your unit for a period of time, where are you going to go?
Right.
Right.
And what happens to all of the items that you lost? And renters' policies are among the cheapest
They are.
policies you can
Right.
possibly find. It's $150, $200,
Right.
extremely well spent.
Exactly correct.
Well, I have a feeling that after this conversation, a lot of people are going to be taking a closer look at their policies, as they should.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
and one last question before we wrap things up.
Sure.
How well should you have that relationship with that adjuster? Is that person your friend when they come out? Should you be tough? Should you be nice? Should you be, what kind
Always
of a?
be nice.
Yeah.
Always
yeah.
take the high road.
Absolutely. And
Okay.
you know what? The thing about it is you treat everyone, basically, they have a job to do and you have a home to be repaired. So, you know what? It's normal for you to be upset, distraught, etc.
But they're on your side, you hope.
No. Well, the thing about it is that ultimately their job is for them to mind the store for the insurance company. They will dispute that, but the facts are there.
Okay.
And so, quite frankly, you know what? If you have any questions or concerns, yes. I don't always advocate getting a public adjuster, but you know what? We handle a lot of calls for free every day for just simple questions, and it's perfectly fine with us.
Okay.
This
has been a very eye-opening and informative discussion, and I want to thank you, Attorney Mike Conroy from Hassett and George, and Ron Cox of Law Settlement Services for your expertise. I'm Ann Baldwin, and a reminder that this program is for informational purposes and is not a substitute for legal advice. We urge you to contact us directly at Hassett and George if you have any further questions on this topic or any legal matter. You can email us at lawmatters@hgesq.com or go to our website at hgesq.com. Thank you so much for watching this edition of Law Matters, and we'll see you again soon.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.